Okay, let's dive into something that feels, well, really personal today. We talk a lot about leadership, in business or politics.
Right, the big stage of
Exactly. But what about leading where it arguably matters most? In our own lives, our relationships, our families. And there's a really fine line, isn't there?
Mhm.
How do we know if we're genuinely leading effectively or if we're just, well, trying to control people?
That distinction is absolutely crucial. And honestly, it's so easy to blur those lines, maybe without even realizing it, especially when you've got emotions and history all mixed in.
It really is. So to explore this, we've actually pulled some insights from two different perspectives we found on YouTube. One is very focused on family leadership, using scripture as a base,
Okay.
and the other looks more broadly at leadership versus control across relationships generally.
So our goal here in this deep dive is really to pull out the clearest, most useful nuggets from both of these sources
Yeah, we want to help you see what real leadership actually looks like in these personal areas.
and understand exactly how it's different from, harmful control. And maybe figure out what it genuinely takes to build those strong, healthy connections that really last.
So where do they even start? Where do these sources say this kind of leadership journey begins?
Well, what's fascinating is that both sources, even coming at it from different angles, they land on the same starting point. Leadership doesn't begin externally.
Okay, not with a title or trying to change someone else?
Exactly. It doesn't start there. It starts internally. It starts with you.
Ah, so less about the position you have and more about your internal state.
Precisely. Source one, the one using scripture, really emphasizes this. It talks about the individual's personal walk and their consistency.
Their walk.
Yeah, and it brings up this idea of fearing the Lord, which they clarify isn't about being scared, but about having this deep respect, this seriousness towards something bigger than yourself, taking it seriously, not just, casually.
Taking it seriously and demonstrating it somehow.
Yes, exactly. The source argues you show this seriousness, not just by what you say, your articulation, but by how you walk, your consistent actions, your day-to-day behavior,
Okay.
that consistent personal walk. That's presented as the absolute foundation,
Yeah.
the necessary starting point for leading in your family or relationships.
Okay, so an internal commitment shown through consistent action. How does the other source frame that starting point?
Source two, the one looking at leadership versus control more broadly, it echoes that internal foundation too, but maybe more through the lens of mindset and intention.
Intention. What kind of mindset are we talking about?
Well, the mindset of genuinely wanting what's best for the other person or people in the relationship. It's about having a clear, conscious desire to create an environment that's healthy, happy, even fun,
Yeah.
for everyone involved.
Not just focusing on your own comfort or your own agenda.
Right, exactly.
Ah, I see the connection then. So whether it's framed in faith, like fearing the Lord and walking in his ways, or just as a conscious intention and wanting others to do well, the core message from both seems to be effective leadership in relationships isn't about being the boss. It starts inside, with your own character, your consistent behavior.
That internal foundation is really the soil where healthy leadership can actually grow.
Which naturally brings us to the next big question. If it's not about being in charge, then how do these sources actually define leadership here?
Right, and this is where Source 2 gives a definition that's, I think, both simple and really quite profound. It basically says, leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of the people in your charge.
Taking care. Wow, that feels like a complete shift in perspective.
It totally changes the dynamic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the source then talks about the qualities that flow from that idea of care, like empathy, really trying to understand where someone else is coming from.
Yeah.
Perspective, seeing things from different angles, not just your own. And sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
Yeah, being willing to put yourself out there, take responsibility if things go wrong,
Yeah.
and genuinely let others take the credit when things go right.
That idea of sacrifice really drives home that it's about service, not about power.
Absolutely. The source is very clear. Leadership in this sense means being in servitude to the people you lead. You're there to serve their well-being, to protect them, nurture them, not to lay down the law or demand they obey.
Okay, so if that's leadership service, care, empathy, what does control look like in comparison?
Well, controlling behavior is pretty much the polar opposite. It's described as selfish, mostly concerned with what you want, what you need.
Right.
It's one-sided, doesn't really care how actions affect others, and it often leans heavily on just a title or position. I'm the husband, I'm the parent, I'm the boss.
Ah, the title crutch.
Exactly. Expecting others to just submit because of that label, demanding they bow down, as the source puts it.
The title without the actual character to back it up. Source 2 had that great analogy, right? The airport scenario.
Oh yeah, that's a really clear example. Imagine you're traveling with a partner. A controller might just fixate on their own preference, maybe like arriving just 45 minutes before the flight.
Cutting it close.
Right, and they might just declare, this is how we do it, my way. They're focused on being right or just getting their way.
The classic my way or the highway approach.
Totally.
Yeah.
But a leader in this framework, knowing their partner gets anxious about missing flights and prefers to be there, say, 3 hours early, they don't just dismiss that.
They acknowledge it.
Yes, they acknowledge the partner's feelings, their perspective. They actually prioritize the partner's comfort and the health of the relationship over being technically right about the fastest way to get through the airport.
So what do?
So they might say something like, okay, I get that you're anxious about the time. 3 hours feels really early to me, but 45 minutes makes you stressed. How about we aim for 2.5 hours before? Can we meet in the middle, find something that works for both of us?
That's such a practical example. The leader isn't trying to win or force their view. They're listening, they're valuing the other person's feelings, and they're looking for a shared solution. It's like collaboration that comes from actually caring.
Exactly. It's about making the people in your charge feel seen, heard, and, valued. And while that's a general principle, it has really profound implications when we think specifically about the family unit.
Which brings us right back to Source 1 and some of its powerful imagery about family leadership. How do these principles, the internal start, care over control, play out inside the home according to that source?
Well, Source 1 uses this analogy of the thermostat and the thermometer for the leader's role, specifically mentioning the husband in that traditional context.
Okay, thermostat and thermometer.
The idea is the leader is the thermostat. They set the climate, the whole environment of the home, through their consistent walk, their steady actions that embody the principles they want to live by.
And the rest of the family sort of reflects that climate.
Yes, exactly. The relationship, which the source symbolizes with the wife, becomes the thermometer. It reads and responds to the temperature being set by the leader's consistency. And the source suggests that as a result of that consistent, virtuous leadership, your wife shall become like a fruitful vine. And importantly, it adds that this principle still applies even if the relationship is tough right now, or even if you're divorced. Your personal consistency can still influence how you interact and model behavior, especially for your kids over the long haul.
That idea of consistency setting the tone no matter the immediate situation, that feels really important, like an anchor. What about the kids in this picture?
The children. They're described as olive plants around the table. And that distinction is key.
Yeah.
They're plants, not fully grown trees yet. They're very much growing and need that nurturing.
And the table itself, it's not just for eating in this view, is it? Source 1 really emphasizes the significance of the family table.
That's absolutely right. In the tradition Source 1 is drawing from, the table wasn't just for meals. It was like the central hub for the father and the mother, too, to actively lead. It was much more than just consuming food.
It was dedicated time.
Dedicated time to consciously pour into the lives of the children.
Pouring in. What did that actually look like?
Well, through intentional connection. Teaching, sure, but maybe even more importantly, asking real questions. Hey, what's going on with you today? Who are you hanging out with? How can I help you with that thing you mentioned?
Real conversation.
Real conversation, connection, and, critically, the source mentions, shared laughter too. Making that time meaningful.
And doing it consistently.
Precisely. The idea is, by making this consistent development at the table, the children, those olive plants, are getting the vital nutrients they need. They're developing deep roots.
Deep roots.
The kind that let them grow into strong, resilient trees capable of lasting for generations. The source even uses the image of 2,000-year-old olive trees to symbolize that kind of enduring strength.
Wow, that image of legacy is powerful. And the source is pretty blunt about what gets in the way of this, right? Distractions.
Oh, absolutely. Very direct about it. Electronics off the table. TV, phones, iPads, put them away.
Yeah.
For everyone, parents included. The message is crystal clear. The leader is personally responsible for the child's development during this crucial time. You can't just outsource that leadership to a screen.
That really underscores the intentional choice involved. You have to actively prioritize that connection.
It demands real presence. And, as Source 1 emphasizes, this investment you make today, pouring into those olive plants at the table, it gives them a blueprint for life.
A blueprint.
Yeah. The hope is they'll carry these principles forward into their own families, so that years from now, you can look out and see your children, and maybe even your children's children, thriving with their own deep roots, continuing that positive legacy.
It connects the really personal, the day-to-day, to something much bigger, spanning generations. And Source One takes that even further, doesn't it? The connection to society.
It does. It makes the argument that the larger story of a nation is basically the story of its families written large. So the health and strength of individual families directly contributes to the well-being of the whole society. Getting your house right, as it says, isn't just a private goal. It's framed as a foundational contribution to something much bigger than yourself.
So leading well at home has this ripple effect out into the community, maybe even the nation.
That's the idea presented. Precisely.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the internal starting point, the definition being care over control, how it applies in the family. But there's one theme that just keeps coming up again and again.
Consistency.
Consistency.
Yeah, it really is the thread holding it all together. Source One hammers this point home. Lead consistently, over and over and over.
And crucially, it talks about the motivation for that consistency, which isn't necessarily about getting the immediate results you want from other people.
Yes, and this is such a critical point because it's where a lot of people stumble, I think. Source One advises against leading just for the response you get back.
Right, not just to make your spouse happy or get your kids to behave right now.
Exactly. The motivation for that consistent action, especially from the scripture-based view it presents, needs to be rooted in doing it because it's the right way to walk. Doing it as unto the Lord, or you could say for a deeply held internal principle or purpose.
Why is that distinction so vital between the internal drive and the external reaction?
Because, as Source One points out, probably the most common reason people give up, they stop leading well, stop trying to set that positive climate, is because they don't see the instant change or the positive feedback they were hoping for from others.
They get discouraged.
They get discouraged. But if your consistent caring actions are driven by something deeper inside you, your own conviction, your personal walk, then whether someone else responds positively right away or not, well, it doesn't dictate whether you keep going.
Your actions aren't dependent on getting that immediate external validation.
Exactly. You're not relying on that to fuel your effort. And the outcome of this kind of steady, internally motivated leadership, well, it might not be instant. There's no magic formula for the timeline. But over time, this is where relationships can genuinely deepen, where trust can actually be built, where children do learn and absorb those principles, and where those deep roots do grow strong. It's the steady walk, the consistent showing up with empathy, patience, sacrifice, care that ultimately yields the lasting results.
It's that quiet, persistent power of just choosing to show up with care day in and day out, even when the feedback isn't immediate. That's what seems to build the lasting connection and the legacy.
It really seems to be the core message, yes.
Okay, so let's try and pull together the main takeaways from this deep dive. We've basically learned that true leadership in our most important relationships, family, partners, close friends, it isn't about having a title or bossing people around.
No, it's fundamentally about your internal state, your clear intention, and then your consistent actions that follow.
It requires things like empathy, being able to see different perspectives, and yeah, sometimes sacrifice.
And it's defined not by being in charge, but by actively taking care of the people who are in your charge, really working to create a healthy, positive space for everyone involved.
And we saw how that plays out specifically in the family context, setting the climate through your own consistency, intentionally pouring into your kids, especially around the table.
Nurturing those deep roots for the next generation, building a legacy that actually goes beyond just your immediate family and contributes to something bigger.
And these aren't just like abstract ideas from the sources, right? These are principles you listening can actually think about applying today in your key relationships.
Absolutely. It really starts with how you choose to show up consistently.
And Source One even offered that specific suggestion for digging deeper, didn't it? Encouraging people to go back to the scripture it uses, maybe read or even memorize Psalms 128 as a sort of blueprint.
Yeah, it emphasizes really understanding the foundation it's built on.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with based on all this, just reflecting on that difference we discussed between genuine, caring leadership and maybe more controlling behavior. Where do you see yourself landing most often in the relationships that really matter to you?
And maybe what's just one small, consistent step you could take this week, starting now, to consciously shift a little more towards that caring side and maybe a little less towards the controlling one.